welcome to another Scots Way podcast. And today I'm joined by DJ, musician and writer George Patterson, and we're here to talk about the latter of those three. But first of all, hello George.
Hello there, Alistair. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. And thanks for taking the time to have a chat, because we're going to talk about your debut novel, The Girl, the Crow, the Writer and the Fighter, which for those on video, I have the copy here. And it's a fantastic book. It's out on the 21st of October with Into Books, and we'll talk about your relationship with them a bit later, I think. But first of all, how do you describe the book? You know, when someone like me asks about it.
It's a shaggy dog tale, really. That's how it feels to me. It feels like a bit of the kind of story you might hear down the pub, but it's the background behind it. It's been formulating for a number of years in my head, and I've been kicking it around for a number of years. And it's probably only in the last year or two that I've started getting to grips with it and putting it together the way that I'd hoped it would be. But yeah, a shaggy dog story is probably the best way to describe it.
That's an interesting way of describing it, and I do know what you mean, but a very sophisticated shaggy dog story, I would have to say.
Well, thank you for that.
So without giving anything away, can you take us through roughly who is the girl, then the crow, then the writer, and then the fighter?
Right, the girl is a character called May Morgenstern, and May was she comes into the story in the mid-80s, and she's a girl who's in her early 20s. Her chance, she thinks, maybe is past, and she's quite content to coast in life. She's, I wouldn't say a slacker, maybe a bit of a proto-slacker, but she comes into possession of a book that was handed to her by a customer of the diner she worked in. And this customer's bequest basically starts the whole story of the crow. I don't want to give too much away about
I know.
Because the crow is, you know, the nemesis of the piece. The writer is Henry Miller, the legendary, as I described him recently, the Indiana Jones of sex. That's how I'm trying to portray him in this story.
He's describing the book. He's describing the book as the king of smut, which I thought was.
Yeah, he is. De Crass, I think it was called. He was. I think a lot of people, their thoughts on Henry Miller are clouded by his reputation, and I always found him quite an interesting character, and a lot of my inspiration for Henry Miller came from the movie Henry and June, and Fred Ward's portrayal of Henry Miller. And I found him quite a muscular, quite dissimilar to the real Henry Miller, but a very interesting take on it. And from that, I started learning more about him. So I've taken some liberties with Henry Miller's life and his career and his writing, as some would say, and I've turned him into a bit of a Sam Spade for the book, basically. And the fighter is Sonny Liston, who is another person I felt was quite misunderstood. One of America's, you know, in the early 60s, he was the world heavyweight boxing champion, but quite a misunderstood person. There's very little known about Sonny Liston's real life. Nobody knows, for instance, when he was born. He didn't know when he was born. Yeah. And the truth around his death is clouded in mystery and intrigue. So I've decided to put some flesh on those rather hefty bones, I feel, with Sonny's life. And with the shaggy dog story part of it comes in with the what if, you know, a bit speculative here. What if Henry Miller met Sonny Liston? What could have happened? And that came about because of an article I read about very unlikely friendships. And I'd already started writing a piece about Henry Miller, a short story based on letters he'd written to a actress slash showgirl called Brenda Venus towards the latter part of his life, called Dear Dear Brenda. And he was quite candid in those letters. So the idea about, you know, the latter years of Henry Miller's life, and had the idea about Sonny Liston from an article Stuart Cosgrove wrote in Bella Caledonia 2015. And he wrote about Sonny Liston coming to Scotland and how welcome he was made to feel. And had he had that welcome in his life more, then his path may have taken a different direction. But I had those two different ideas I was kicking about. And I read an article about unusual friendships. And in the article, it was the friendship between Samuel Beckett and Andre the Giant. So they were friends, bizarrely. You know, this stone-faced Irish legendary playwright, Waiting for Godot, but he was the father of Andre the Giant was a farm labourer who worked on Beckett's property, and Beckett used to drive Andre to school in the morning, and they talked about cricket. So it's a very unusual, unlikely friendship, and that's what triggered putting Henry Miller and Sonny Liston together.
That's fascinating. Because for those who don't know, Andre the Giant went on to be a wrestler.
And a famous film actor in things like The Princess Bride.
That's exactly it. Yeah, what a fantastic story that is. So there's a lot there that we can kind of get stuck into, I think, without giving away spoilers, because sure. The opening kind of chapter is when Miller and Liston are in the same room. Liston's in the ring and Miller's ringside. Was that how you started the book? Did you have that idea as your first scene?
I think when I write, I'm not a trained literature student, so writing it's been quite odd for me. I've not thought about it. I think about it more cinematic, right. How I would write this if I was watching it. So I write it the way I would think I would watch it. So it needs a dramatic opening. It needs something that sort of makes you think. So I started off by plotting it. Once I decided to put these two very disparate stories together, I decided to plot it starting with Liston's second fight with Ali. And that would have been just across the Androscoggin River from where the bulk of the story takes place. So that's really where I started, and to try and gingerly introduce both of the writer and the fighter to the audience.
Because you've got that key sentence at the beginning, that is it safe? Which for anyone who's ever watched The Marathon Man gave me chills thinking back to that was the case. But, you know, that becomes that just absolutely sets the scene in terms of you just have to read on. You have to know what the hell's going on and what this is all about. And sorry.
No, that's that kind of Maltese Falcon-esque kind of thing, you know, the Dashiell Hammett thing is very influential for me. It's and I want the reader to think, is this a MacGuffin? Is this real? Is this like the Maltese Falcon? Is this as important to us as it is to the writer or the characters? Or is the story really about the friendships or the relationships? So I've dangled a wee MacGuffin out there, possibly.
And to go back to Henry Miller, I mean, I was someone who read Henry Miller probably because he was controversial and had this reputation, and also, you know, this relationship with Anaïs Nin and all of that. I kind of moved from reading the beat writers when I was in my teens to kind of Henry Miller's kind of seemed the next step because it was, you know, slightly illicit. And there's some fantastic scenes in libraries where people are almost, they've got hidden copies of things, you know, around the back, the special. It's a fantastic kind of way.
Well, he was banned for years. He was banned for years in his own country. He was seen as I see him as, he was the precursor to the beat writers. He was people like Blaise Cendrars and Henry Miller were like kicking the doors down, so Kerouac could follow through, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I just found him such an interesting character, and his writing changed considerably from those early days in Paris to his latter days, his more reflective days, when he was living in Northern California.
Because that's exactly the kind of path I took. You had Kerouac and other beat writers, and you went, oh, how were they influenced? What came before them? And it seemed to be these were the American writers, or he was particularly the American writer that, as you say, allowed them to experiment in terms of style, but certainly in terms of substance. Just a thought here, why did you decide that this was the novel you wanted to write?
It sort of just forced its way to the front of my head. I've been writing for, the writing had taken over from the music in my life. I've been involved in music since I was a teenager, playing with bands and recording albums and stuff. And the writing just seemed to get longer, and it seemed more of an extension. I was writing things and songs that were lasting maybe 5-6 minutes that I felt I need to expand on that. So the writing became more of a part of my life, and I was writing for my band. I was writing on our websites and doing little blogs and just absolute nonsense, fictional stuff, just basically to tickle them and tickle myself. And then it just grew from there. And I've written a couple of screenplays, and I've written a very extended piece about the history of my band and how disastrous we were trying to break into the music industry. So that was at the forefront. And then this one just sort of just overtook it in the final lap. And it was a lot more serious and a lot more the way my mind was going. I recently, when I started taking the story seriously, I got back into fiction. I'd stopped reading fiction for years, and I was reading mainly fact-based books, but I get right back into, especially the genre bending fiction, like people like David Peace, and people who are just experimenting with rhythm. It felt maybe that was a good stepping off point from music into writing, was the rhythms of things like Red or Dead, but David Peace just blew me away, and that got me back into fiction again. And then I've been reading voraciously ever since, and that's forced me into writing. And then you've got guys like Jenny Fagan and David Keenan, who've just absolutely destroyed me over the last couple of years, what they've been working on. And it's forced me to really go for it. I'm not in the first flush of youth, so I'm very aware that time is a factor here. So I'm not hanging about, I'm just going for it. And in a way, Henry Miller was the same. He became Henry Miller as a middle-aged man. He was in Paris in his mid to late 40s, and that's when he started becoming the writer he was meant to be. So maybe there's some influence there.
Because it's interesting that it is a love letter to America. That's how it certainly reads to me.
Yeah.
And, it's full of references, some of them quite niche. I was thinking it references Gates of Steel by Devo, Andy Van Warmer, who haven't thought about it in many a decade. And also the AMC Pacer car, which was very American, kind of cheap car. So it feels that you really enjoyed that part of the writing, maybe get stuck in America.
Well, America's a big influence on me. You mentioned in your very kind notes to me when you were supporting the novel before we were published there. You mentioned that America was a big influence on many Scots, but myself in particular, a lot of the art and creativity that I love and admire comes from, jazz, blues, soul, and a lot of that comes from America. A lot of the great writers, the writers that I'm getting into now, people like Ira Levin and Jonathan Lethem and people like that, and they're American, very strongly American, in their themes. So yeah, America's been a big influence on me, and it was lovely to New York, for instance, in particular, is a place I love. It's probably, if you could say, go and spend a week in one part of the world, drop me in Manhattan, and I'll be in my element. I'll love it a bits, and I feel absolutely charged when I'm in New York City. So yeah, it's definitely a big influence on me, as is Paris. I love Paris too. So those places definitely drove this process.
Because I was thinking it's also kind of homage to this idea for me of the great American novel, which is a bit of a mythical beast. People talk about what is the great American novel. So, I mean, aside from the people you've mentioned, Ann Miller, who were the other influences that you were that you took on board?
Well, people mentioned Dashiell Hammett early on. That's a big influence on me, his style of writing. I tried to get into Hemingway, and I couldn't really get into the vibe of Hemingway. I like the idea of Hemingway, but not necessarily the prose, because it's a bit too, it's bone dry for me. I like a wee bit more. I wouldn't go as far as what's his name, John Kennedy Toole. That far. I would go somewhere in between. People like Pynchon would be, Inherent Vice, things like that were really like pushing where I was going with that. Those are the ones that were influencing me most. But a lot of my own influences come from, as I said earlier on, cinematic themes and cinematic writers, theatre writers like Neil Simon. So I was saying to David, I was talking to David Ross about this a couple of weeks ago, and my prose, I'm aiming for people like Pynchon, but I'm not reaching it. But that's what I'm aiming for: Pynchon, Hammett, Elmore Leonard. That's what I'm going for. But when it comes to my dialogue, I'm very much William Goldman, Nora Ephron, and Neil Simon. Those are the ones that are driving my dialogue. So, and because I've never been trained, I don't know if this is the right thing to do. I'm not sure whether that this is. I honestly don't know. It's the new frontier for me.
Yeah. What I would say is, having spoken to many different writers, is there's almost as many different ways of writing as there is writers. Some are incredibly planned, some just start and see where it goes. It's as
there is a fair bit of planning. There's a lot of research done on particularly the places, and some to do with the people as well, but primarily on this book I did a lot of research on, I know Paris quite well, I know New York quite well, but I don't know Maine, and I don't know Corfu. So I had to do a wee bit of research on Auburn, Maine, and a bit on Corfu, and I've tried to throw it together and hope it's stuck. And it seems from the early responses to it, it seems to have stuck quite well.
I was going to ask you about your research, because there's a scene where I just realized that this is the book for me, and it's the discussion about tweed and tailoring that they have, and that's made in that shop in Edinburgh and all that. I'm just absolutely loving this stuff. But I wondered how much research you did, not just for that, but for the book as a whole.
Yeah, that tweed scene, Miller's father was a tailor. So Miller grew up around tailoring, around material and stuff. So he already had a background in that, but he was also a great bluffer. So he could bullshit his way through things. And I've just, pushed that a little bit there. So that's that particular scene, that's what it was. But I did a bit of research on the types of tweeds and the types of I made a couple of names up though, so I bluffed it myself.
But that's the great thing. There's no way, unless people are really into Googling every single name.
That couldn't possibly happen. I know there'll be a lot of that kind of stuff where and the timelines, it's very important for me to get the
Yeah.
timeline right, because there's only a certain couple of times in their lives that they could have possibly, Miller and Liston could have possibly met. And it couldn't have been much later than 1956 or 57, because Liston's career was already taken off. Miller was available there's a very short window, basically sometime in the middle of 1953, when Liston was basically busted out of jail. He was doing a 5-year stretch, I believe, and he was let out after a year because certain mob figures realised he was a moneymaker as a fighter, get him out of jail. So there's a wee spell there, sometime in the middle of 1953, and I tried to work it that it would be round about the time that Django Reinhardt passed away, and they're hunting for Gypsy Guitar in Paris, the sounds of a city in mourning, and I try to make that work.
And when I read it for the first time, and you had the scenes, it starts with Miller in Paris, as you say, and it becomes this spy thriller, and I just did not expect that. I mean,
No.
really, as you were saying, it is muscular. I mean, it's almost a slap, cigarettes and scotch, you know, they've got that
Yeah.
kind of, it's hard-nosed thriller stuff. And where did the inspiration for that come from? Again,
it's the Hammett influence. It's the Sam Spade, Elmore Leonard stuff. That's a big influence. It was more of an exercise. Could I possibly make this work? Could I turn bookish Brooklynite Henry Miller into someone who could feasibly, escape the clutches of, a bunch of muscular ne'er-do-wells? And I think I managed to do it. I think I was able to do it. But again, in my mind, I've still got Fred Ward, from the movie. And in that respect, he's more like Indiana Jones. I keep coming back to it's like Indiana Jones. He wears the same hats and wears the same gear, but he doesn't get involved in fighting. If you notice in the book, there's only one instance of Henry Miller resorting to violence in the whole book. He doesn't get involved in any of the violent acts. Violence happens around him.
Big violence happens around him.
a lot happens around him, but he doesn't actually get involved personally in the violence.
It's so interesting talking to you, and you talk about the kind of cinematic influence, because I'm now rethinking the book as we talk, and you've got that kind of almost Humphrey Bogart or Jimmy Cagney or that kind of, tough guy there involved, not necessarily Miller himself, but those kind of characters that are suddenly surrounding him. But then you've got this other section, as you said, that's in the mid-80s, that is Nora Ephron almost. Letters and discovery and relationships and all of that. And is that how you started to look at the two different sides of things?
Yeah, I was trying to bring them together in the middle. The older Miller got, the more sentimental he got, and the more reflective he became, looking back at his life and the mistakes that he made, and the people he left behind. Whereas the character of Mae Morgenstern and the people that she was involved with, they were already at this, just coasting stage, but they were dragged into situations not of their making, and it forced them to work out who they were, where they were going, and how they would deal with any issues that were thrown up. And I threw a lot Mae's way, and I found her as a heroine of the piece to be quite inspirational. She's based on a couple of different people,
right.
Real life people, and those are people based on three people in particular, but those three women are people I admire greatly because of their fortitude and their ability to turn hopeless situations into something positive. So on her journey to where we get to at the end was quite probably the most satisfying part of writing the book.
Yeah. No, I can understand that. The Miller sections that we've been talking about are thrills and spills, but the kind of emotional heart, I think, are May's sections, I think, for me.
Yeah.
And it does seem that this manuscript that she's bequeathed comes along at just the right time for her.
Yeah, she's a girl who's just going through the motions, likes her baseball, likes Cheers, listens to music. She's in a couple of, unsatisfactory relationships. She's looking for something, and Henry Miller and Anais Nin have opened the doors to, another world in literal and figurative senses. And other characters that I won't mention at the moment
Yeah.
are very influential in May's development as well. So, yeah, I found it really satisfying to write those characters and bring those characters in.
I mean, reading's at the heart of the book. There's even a mention of Muriel Spark, which made me smile at the end. But
Muriel Spark's a big influence on me. She's one of my favourite writers. If you're talking fearless, Muriel Spark's right up there. She is, if you look at things like Driver's Seat, the Driver's Seat's just, it's one of those books that you get from time to time that has you literally on the edge of your seat. You're like thinking, where is this going? It couldn't possibly go where it's going. And she takes you all the way there.
Yeah.
It's something, again, I was talking to David Ross recently about this, something that he did in his own book, There's Only One Danny Garvey. He took the story, the last 30 pages of that story, he just keeps taking you somewhere. And you're like, oh no, I'm not sure he's going to go there. And he does go there. And that for me is thrilling. As a reader, it's thrilling. And if you can do it as a writer, that's incredible.
I think
Muriel
you're right.
Spark's big for me.
David Ross's writing does do that. He is fearless, and he will, where other people might decide to take a left turn or to twist things, he'll follow it through to the end.
Oh, I was blown away by the ending of Danny Garvey. It was a remarkable final couple of chapters there. Really, hats off to the man.
And The Driver's Seat's one of my favourite books of all time. It's just astonishing. If
It's,
anyone hasn't read it, it's incredible.
I'd highly recommend it.
Yeah. But it does seem to me, I think you've maybe answered this, but there's a theme underlying the novel, which is that books can change lives.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'll give you an example. I was a lazy scholar at school. I was not motivated. I was lazy. I wasn't particularly academic. I was pretty smart, but not focused. And most of my English teachers, they either wanted to be your friends, they wanted to be chummy with you, or they were, it was decades of repressed anger they wanted to, dish out to, the youth of Pollock. So for me, meeting a teacher, Mr. O'Hagan was my 5th year English teacher, and he spotted, he was like, right, I know what you're thinking. You need something. And he gave me Evelyn Was the Loved One. Right. And he was like, right, you're going to read this and we're going to talk about it. So we read The Loved One. It blew me away, man. Absolute. The absurdity, but was everything about it was just, it made me laugh and made me think. I was like, this is not what I was expecting from a book. And he totally changed my view on literature in about a month. And he put me on to people like Muriel Spark. And he put me on to Ira Levin, Rosemary's Baby. Because you knew the movie, but read the book. The book's very different. See what you get for the book. And wow, satire, fantastic. I love it. It's right up my street. So Mr. O'Hagan really just a couple of wee tunes on the dial and I was gone. So yeah, books, a certain book at the right time, change your world.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And let's talk about your book, because the actual physical book, when I say that, because it is a lovely thing. I have to say, I'm holding it up again. It's a really, there's few books that you hold in your hand and you just go, oh yeah, this is meant to be. Now, you've been working with Into Books and Into Creative. Yeah. How did that come about? Because I think they've done an incredible job, I have to say.
Stephen Cameron from Into has been a force of nature. Really, he's a phenomenal fellow.
Yes.
Really happy to have met him. We've been interacting online for years, and then when I moved back up to Scotland, I was in London for nearly 30 years. When I came back to Scotland, I hooked up with him a couple of times, and we had a lot in common. So he'd hosted the radio show that I did on Cumbernauld FM. I do this weekly radio show called Lost in Music, and he hosts it for me as part of Into. And I've been talking to him about, we go for walks and stuff like that, and he's published a couple of books under Into, and I wasn't really thinking about, pitching it to him, but I was chatting to him and his missus Jan, and they were asking, what's the book about? I've been talking about it for a wee while. I gave them a wee breakdown of what it was about, and Jan seemed quite excited by it, but Stephen was going, well, I don't really read fiction very often, and I'm quite a slow reader, but send me a manuscript anyway, I'll have a wee look at it, and I can maybe point you in the direction of a publisher who may be interested in it. And at that stage I wasn't really thinking about getting a publisher. I was like, let's get it done first, let's get it written as best I can, get it out there. So he said it was a really slow reader, and don't expect much. I sent him a manuscript, and later that night he sent me a picture, and it was page 77, and he went, we need to talk. So I gave him a shout, and he said, this is incredible, because I've not been able to put it down. It's such an exciting book. We need to go for a long walk and have a long talk about, I want Into to publish this. It's like, wow, okay. So it's not the biggest imprint on the planet, but I know that the people at Into have got my back, and they're really passionate about the story and passionate about getting the book out there, and they've been fantastic with me. They've been exemplary.
And I think that's exactly what you want. You want
absolutely.
That kind of backing and knowing. And as I say, they've done an incredible job with it.
Oh, it looks fantastic. It looks, everything about it, it looks and feels like I would expect something that they would do.
Yeah,
they're very, very professional, and their dealings, everything about it. It's my first experience of being published, and my first experience of working with a publisher, and it's been fantastic. I can't speak highly enough of them.
And in terms of the process, were there a lot of back and forth? Did you have a lot still to write? Was there too many words, as is often the case?
Yeah. There was a lot of that. It was like, I edited it down from, I think it was 119,000 words. I edited it down to 120,000 words. So, it was one of those. I needed to stop myself. I just needed to go, that's enough. Stop writing, man. I could keep going, and I could keep, digging wee holes and stuff, but I thought, nah, that's enough. But I did, a few writers I did speak to were very, very helpful. Again, back to David Ross. David Ross was very helpful. Other writers like Tom Gillespie, who wrote the Strange Book of Jacob Boyce, fantastic book. They were very helpful and gave us a lot of really good advice. David Cameron as well, who wrote Prendergast Fall. They gave me a lot of good advice, and I trimmed away as much fat as I possibly could to try and keep the story alive, without leaving it down to the bare bones. So cutting as much fat off it as I possibly could. I did take a good few thousand words off.
Mm-hmm. And I can understand why Stephen couldn't put it down, because I couldn't put it down either. It's exactly that kind of book that you really just want to know. You want to know, because it is almost two stories that run concurrently, and you want to know what happens next in both of them. So that kind of drives things on to the end, I think.
Thanks, man. That's great.
So have you got something next? Or, I mean, you say you've been writing for a while. Is there plans or is it too early?
Yeah, I've got too many ideas in my head. Really, my head's full of mince and full of wee stories. My next one, I'm probably going to finish off the story. It's more like sort of comedy drama of the story of my band. It is just we were shambolic attempts to break into the music industry. The story has been told many times, but it's all true, and it's. I found it funny when I was writing it, and I'm writing it really before I lose my mind and forget it all. So I'd like that one finished. But the next fictional piece I've been scoping out and I've been doing my homework on. And if you ever see me walking about the West End of Glasgow, that's what I'm doing. It's a sort of, going back to Ira Levin's Rosemary's Baby, it's a sort of West End based horror, creepy horror sets round about the streets, up top of Observatory Roads, you know, where Alistair Gray's place used to be, just round those kind of streets, about a cult and an innocent being taken into this cult, and the repercussions it has for him and the people that were involved. So that's what I'm plotting out at the moment. I'm planning it as a novella, but I know how I write. I'll probably end up having 180,000 words. It'll be Donna Tartt levels, you know. So that's probably next.
That sounds fascinating. I'm sure those things don't go in the West End of Glasgow.
Oh, absolutely not. It's all in my mind.
Well, George, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Alistair. Thank you.
And do go out and check out The Girl, the Crow, the Writer and the Fighter, because it's an exceptional book. And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.